Coasters, it's Bruce here, and I'm at the top end of the, well actually I'm in Kowhitirangi, but up Lake Arthur, and I'm with Rob Langridge. Rob, you're with GNS?
That's right, I'm an earthquake geologist at GNS Science, and I work quite a bit on the west coast on the Alpine Fault, trying to work out the hazard posed by the fault and the history of past earthquakes. So I've come here to literally dig that up. Fault here has been mapped as a fault line in the past by several generations of geologists going back to Harold Wellman, and we in fact did a project here about 12 years ago and excavated some other trenches which have just recently been published in a paper. But we've excavated this trench this week mainly as a means to as a means of outreach and to educate the public and the people of the west coast, particularly around Kowhitirangi, showing them the fault line and stuff.
So are we we're in the trench here, are we on the fault line somewhere?
Yeah, we're on one strand of the fault. There's one off behind you, which is the main strand, and
yep.
To bear with me, there's a line of markers we've got here in red, come up towards the surface, and that marks the fault, and it's the boundary between, you see these orange gravelly silt materials on that side, which belong to this high terrace up here.
Yep.
And this really quite interesting layered sequence of grey silts, grits, and the brown and black peaty units, which are fine grain units which have filled in the space against the fault. So we would interpret that there's been several or multiple earthquake ruptures here, which have progressively formed a space which have filled in with fines at the back edge of this terrace.
This is fascinating.
The peats particularly represent stable periods in the history of the land when there was a swamp forming here.
Yep.
And then we would interpret that the abrupt arrival of quite stony and woody deposits represent slips, or what we call colluvium, and these have abruptly buried a pretty stable swampy land surface. So there's one there.
So Rob, will this information feed into the AF8 program, which then feeds into civil defence?
That's right, yeah, it's more information, it's more science, building around what we know about the Alpine Fault and the history of its events. We're trying to understand how often the fault moves, how big the events are, and how long the ruptures are up and down the coast.
Wow. Well, look, the more information we've got, the best. I mean, it makes it easier to assess the risk, doesn't it?
Sure does, yeah.
But look, you've picked a fantastic weather. How'd you do that?
We had some rain. We had some rain earlier, but it's all worked out in the end. We've had 4 or 5 days of beautiful sunshine.
Did you get, were you here Monday?
Oh yeah.
What did you think of that?
It rained pretty heavy on Monday, and it was pretty wet here on Tuesday morning still, but yeah.
Well, coasters,
coast weather.
That's Rob Langridge. He's from GNS, and they're working hard to identify where the fault is, how often it's moved, and put it all together and turn it into something meaningful that we can all work with. Look, Rob, thanks so much for your time, and I'd love to hear more.